A Creepy Air BnB, submitted by Karim N. I'm a British guy, and this story takes place on a short holiday me and 3 friends had in Paris, France, in February a few years back. I think I was 24 at the time. We were staying in an Airbnb place on the edge of North Paris, and not too far from the Eurostar station. The accommodation was a pretty old, traditional Parisian apartment building with a main entrance on the high street which led into a courtyard and then into the main block of apartments. Our apartment had 2 floors, with a metal spiral staircase between them. This staircase didn't have any banisters, which meant that the metal steps creaked loudly with any pressure on them. From the moment we got to the place, we realized it was pretty weird. There were paintings in most of the rooms done in a heavily painted, expressive style with dark, muddy colors. One looked like a horse carcass with its ribs showing. One was a portrait hanging in the bathroom which had the face cut out of the canvas and a metal fan shoved into the hole instead. There were also old-looking chandeliers and a red handprint painting in the living room. There was a small box that one of us accidentally knocked off a shelf a few days into our stay, which we realized was some sort of old, worn board game-looking thing. But it had a ring of demons dancing on the cover around some strange symbols. Along with antique furniture and old wooden floorboards, it made for a pretty interesting, if not somewhat creepy, place to stay. My friends and I are definitely into the horror supernatural genre, and we're all very interested by anything spooky. And although none of us had really had any first-hand experience of any weird goings-on, I wouldn't say any of us are believers, and probably still wouldn't use that term. But there are definitely things that can't be explained easily. So anyway, the first night we're there, we all head off to sleep. My friends, who are the couple, were in a double room downstairs, and I was in the first room on the top floor, and my other friend was in a room which is linked to mine, but away from the staircase or landing. The door to my room from the landing was shut, and the landing itself was maybe only around 3 foot square. At around 1:30 a.m., I was finally drifting off after spending a long time trying to get comfortable, when I heard a noise on the floorboards downstairs. At first I thought nothing of it. It's a super old place, so creaks and cracks are to be expected. But then I heard it again in succession. I figured it must have been one of the friends downstairs getting up to use the bathroom or get a drink or something. At this point, I was slightly annoyed because I know I'm going to spend ages trying to get to sleep. And then I heard the noise again. This time it really woke me up, as it's slow, and it sounded like deliberate footsteps, like someone creeping along, trying to be as quiet as possible rather than just someone getting up to get something. So now I'm awake in bed and trying to listen out for any more floorboard creaks. It hasn't been that loud, but loud enough to hear from downstairs through my shut bedroom door. I texted my friends downstairs to see if they were awake and walking around, but they didn't answer. As I sat up in bed trying to listen out for any other noises, I was suddenly aware that this was someone else's apartment, so maybe the owners had keys, and maybe somebody else had keys, or maybe it was someone who had broken in. Obviously, these thoughts were waking me up further, and I was hoping I didn't hear any other noises. A few minutes went by in silence, and then all of a sudden I heard a louder creak, which must have been right by the bottom of the staircase. Then slowly, I heard the metal risers of the spiral staircase creaking, but not like normal footsteps. It was slow and getting slightly louder each time as the creaks moved towards the top of the stairs. At this point, I was pretty much panicking, thinking that we were going to get robbed, and there wasn't much I'd be able to do about it. I looked around the room for something to defend myself with, and there was a skateboard and an electric guitar. I chose the guitar and picked it up slowly in silence and creeped to the closed bedroom door. As I was there by the door, I could pretty much hear my heart pounding, but but I was trying to stay calm and listen for more sounds. Another minute or so went by with nothing. Then I heard a much louder creak, which was just on the other side of the door, right at the top of the landing, and it was just one loud creak, like pressure from a substantial weight being put on the floor. Just like the sound of a person standing on the other side of the door. I'm not afraid to say that that was the most terrified I've ever been in a moment, and was pretty sure someone had come to steal our stuff or attack us. I was basically frozen for a good few minutes and hoping that the door wouldn't open. After a few more minutes of silence, with one ear pressed to the door, I decided I should have a look, so I slowly and very quietly turned the doorknob and opened the door a crack. All I could see was darkness, but I could see the floorboards nearest the door, and no one was there, so using my phone flashlight, I shone light beyond the doorway, and could see that the landing and upstairs bathroom was empty. I then turned my arm, shining the light down the staircase. Again, completely empty. I slowly came out from the bedroom and crept down the stairs, the light still shining as the steps made their creaking groans. I opened the door to my friend's room and whispered for them to wake up, and told them, "I think there's somebody in the house." They were both pretty startled, of course, and one of them came with me to look around the rest of the place, looking in every room and cupboard, but there was nothing at all to be found. The next day, one of my friends told me she had also heard the creaking downstairs by the kitchen, but had assumed it was one of us, so hadn't really thought anything of it. We were there for 5 or 6 nights, and on the third night, the couple in the downstairs room said they had heard some creaky noises, and something that sounded a bit like shuffling, but it had gone silent after that, so they figured it just must have been the house. We also found that on the landing by the upstairs bathroom, there was a small doorway around 3 feet high which had a plank of wood padlocked in place across the front of it. We only found it because there was a pile of old soft toys in front of it, and I had picked one up and waved it at my friend, saying they were pretty creepy, which made the others tumble away to reveal the door. Obviously, we didn't mess with that. It could have just been a boiler or a utility space or something, but it seemed pretty odd anyway. On the last morning, as we left the apartment and were walking down the main hallway, we saw that a door that we had walked by each day, which was usually locked, had been opened, but behind it was just a plain brick wall. We also heard a really loud, old-sounding cat a couple of times in the hallway, but we never saw that. I know this story doesn't have much of a conclusion, but that's what happened, and it was genuinely very scary at the time, and neither I or my friends can tell you what was going on. We just hope it was the noises of a really old building. The Maine Woods by Denise G. This isn't really near Arcadia, but it's on the way, and the story just came to me about a minute ago. I grew up in a small town in Maine near Bowdoin College, and about 2 years ago I was dating a guy from there. The town, not the college, and he graduated the same high school as I did. And he graduated from the same high school as I did. He was a couple of years older than I and had spent a few years in the Army, traveling to such exotic places as Korea. I have traveled a few places myself, and being open to new places and experiences, never thought of myself as shy or easily frightened by much of anything. One evening, the man I was seeing, Tim, and I decided we would head out into the woods to one of the numerous secluded areas in Bowdoin where we could spend some quality time, doing such things as talking and other nonsense that lovers do. This particular night, we had driven up to an old quarry and it was overcast, so that when the truck was parked and the lights were turned off, the world around us was inky black. I had trouble making out trees that I knew were just beyond the window of the truck. Nights like that always make one a little wary, and there is something almost natural and primal about being in the woods so deep you can't see or hear anything but silence. Like I said, I'm not shy, and on this night I was feeling adventurous and I wanted to get out of the truck. They get a little cramped doing what lovers do. So out of the truck I went and into the bed of the truck. Tim followed suit. We lay there on a blanket for a long while when we heard a loud thump on the hood of the truck. I thought a branch had fallen onto the hood, but it was enough to startle us both into getting a flashlight from inside the truck. We looked on the hood. Nothing. We looked around the truck. Nothing but normal leaves and trail. No branches loud enough to make the sound we heard. The flashlight was one of those halogen beams that is about 10 times brighter than a normal flashlight, but the darkness was eating up all the light with the exception of the beam from the bulb. Usually there is a wide area those lights will cover, but this time, however, the lights seemed to be overwhelmed by the darkness around us. Feeling a bit on edge, I decided to get back into the truck, but didn't want to leave the woods. As we sat there talking, we got more and more comfortable, and then something slammed into the side of the truck hard enough to make it rock on the shocks. To me, it sounded and felt like it hit my side just behind the door, and I felt suddenly uneasy. I thought at first a tree had fallen on us, and Tim turned on the truck lights and got out of the truck to look around. I stayed in it and watched as he walked around the truck looking at the ground and at the side of the truck. He signaled for me to get out, and I did so. Where I thought the tree had fallen, there was a muddy smudge on the side of his truck, but no tree. Nothing on the ground or around us that would have caused what we had just experienced. He asked if I wanted to go, and at that time I felt very strongly like we should leave. But my curiosity was getting the better of me, and I wanted to stay and see what happened next. We got back in the truck and sat there, anticipating. Tim turned off all the lights and cracked some jokes about privacy in the deep woods. The longer we sat there, the more easy I got, till I felt like I was nearly terrified for no reason. I wanted to leave. Tim, obviously feeling the same way, started the truck, and we sped out of the woods at tire-blowing speeds till we saw the lights of houses. We went into Brunswick and got out to look at the truck again, and where that smudge had been before, now the truck was untouched, like nothing had happened. We never saw what hit the truck or experienced anything like that again. Cryptid Camping by Lost My Grip. 3 years ago, my now husband Devin, my best friend Kiana, her boyfriend Elias, and I all decided to go to this local campground for a 2-night camping trip. The campground is located in Graham, North Carolina, and has a sizable swimming pond in the center of the property. Our campsite was about a football field's length from the pond, towards the back of the grounds in a lightly wooded area. Once we arrived and paid our fees to the little old lady at the front gate, we drove to our site and parked. One of the reasons we love this campground so much is you drive directly up to your site. It's nice to have the car nearby for music and supplies. We'd packed 2 tents, blankets, firewood, food, a few changes of clothes, and of course, copious amounts of alcohol. We had also brought along our bathing suits and towels to go swimming in the pond. Though it was late September in North Carolina. Having a 75-degree Christmas here isn't unheard of or even rare, so the water was still warm enough to swim in. After we set up our camp, we grabbed some beers and started making dinner over a fire the guys had started. Our dinner was simple, just hot dogs and chips, and afterward we listened to some music playing from the car's stereo and drank our beers. It was one of those perfect nights, the kind exclusive to the southeast United States. The stars were crystal clear and shining, and a warm breeze carried the music through the air. By the time we finished off the first 18-pack of beer we brought, Kiana and I were happily and clumsily dancing around the fire and loudly singing that song from summer camp, "Do Your Ears Hang Low?" That's when I decided I absolutely had to go take a late-night swim in the pond. The others readily agreed, and the beer probably influencing their approval. We all grabbed our suits and some towels and headed towards the pond. I noticed on our walk that only one other campsite, and luckily a good distance from ours, was occupied. I only saw their old truck and tent, but no people anywhere. I checked my watch and was surprised to see it was already a quarter after midnight. Whoops. We stopped off halfway at the community restrooms to change into our swimsuits. Kiana and I headed into the ladies' room, and Devin and Elias went towards the men's room, talking and laughing boisterously about something. That made me smile. As we changed into our bikinis, we were chattering excitedly about the night, and finally getting to have a couple's weekend. As we were checking ourselves out in the large, floor-to-ceiling mirror, yeah, we all do it, we heard a deafening crash against the back wall of the building. I yelped for Devin, and he immediately ran into the bathroom, followed closely by Elias. We told them in a panic what had happened, Kiana and I talking over each other excitedly. She asked bluntly if they were fucking with us, and they assured us they weren't. There was no way they could have made that bang at the back of the building, and then seconds later run into the bathroom at the front of the building. We all grew quiet as we heard the sound of someone shuffling through the fallen twigs from the other side of the back wall. I crept slowly towards the window, which was compromised of a single screen that overlooked behind the building, and stood up on my tiptoes to look out. My eyes strained against the darkness, but I swore I saw that little old lady from the front gate walking by. Her gait strange, about 6 yards out from the building. What in the hell was she doing back there? Devin said we should go back there and check it out, just to make sure there wasn't some creeper peeping in on girls when they were changing. Devin and Elias took the lead with their larger flashlight that doubled as a baton, while Kiana and I followed closely behind, huddled together and holding hands. I kept pointing my smaller flashlight behind us, totally paranoid. As we crept around the last corner, I heard Devin let out a short, relieved laugh. I let go of Kiana and stepped around him, curious. I saw a very large, broken tree branch leaning against the building, obviously fallen from a very large nearby tree. The sharp, pointed tip of it reached just below the same screen window I just looked out of. We all looked at each other embarrassed and then just burst out laughing. Devin put his arm around me as Elias announced that it was time for that dip in the pond. At that, we were off towards the pond, talking loudly and laughing at ourselves. By the time we reached the shore, the bathroom incident was mostly forgotten, aside from the occasional smart-ass remark from the guys about their chicken shit girlfriends. We laid out our stuff on some plastic chairs we found nearby under a large lamppost, and the lamppost was on a timer, so we turned it to the highest setting, 20 minutes. On the base of the lamppost was a list of rules. No swimming alone, no diving from the shore, wait 15 minutes to enter the water after eating, the standard aquatic center rules. While I noticed there weren't any posted hours, I still felt a bit like we were doing something that we shouldn't. I chuckled quietly at myself and my residual paranoia, and then heard a loud splash, followed by a squeal and laughing from behind me. I heard Devin say my name, calling me. Maddie? I spun around to see Kiana and Elias splashing each other, and Devin waiting for me at the water's edge, hand outstretched. After we'd played for a few minutes, laughing and splashing each other, I was floating in the water on my back, my hair swirling all around me. I was relaxed, looking up at the stars. A few minutes later, I heard Devin call out my name again, from further out in the water. I rolled over and started swimming out deeper, towards his voice. I'd only swam about 10 feet when I heard a loud clicking noise, and the light from the lamppost turned off, suddenly shrouding me in darkness. I heard Kiana let out a small, surprised scream back at the shore. I was watching a figure, I assume it was Elias, grab the flashlight off the sand and head up the small hill towards the lamppost. From right behind me, I heard Devin whisper my name. Maddie? I turned in the water and we were face to face. He kissed me, hard and rough, his beard scratching my face. It wasn't like our usual kiss, it was more desperate. When he pulled back, I looked up at him, and my eyes trying to adjust to the sudden dark. When I found his eyes, I gasped. Something was off. His eyes, they were black, and I mean black. There were no whites to his eyes at all, and they seemed to be glowing despite the lack of light. The Discovery Channel and an episode about nocturnal predators flashed through my mind. He was smiling at me, but it looked all wrong. It was all teeth, and there was no curve to his lips. It was evil. I heard the loud clicking again, and turned back towards the shore just as the light switched back on. I'd swum out even further than I thought. I was practically in the middle of the pond. I slowly turned back towards Devin, not really wanting to look at those eyes again. But he was gone, and I was alone. I could feel it. There was no break in the water besides my own. I was suddenly very aware of how dark the water was beneath me. Keeping my eyes on Kiana and Elias at the shore, I started to quickly swim back. Suddenly, someone stepped into the circle of light cast by the lamppost. It was Devin. I reached the shore at the same time he reached the water's edge, and I asked him, voice quivering, where he'd gone. He told me he'd just gone back up to the car to get more beer for everyone. And sure enough, he was carrying our small red cooler. What the fuck? Just what? I could tell by the way Devin was staring with his piercing blue eyes that he knew something was up with me. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. His smile. I said I was cold, and not exactly alive, and exhausted. Though the latter couldn't be further from the truth. I was wired. I could practically feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. But I knew we were being watched by something beyond our protective circle of light, and I wanted to get us the hell out of there. Devin asked Elias and Kiana if they were ready to head back with us, but they said they'd catch up with us later. I really didn't want to leave them behind, but I didn't want to admit to what I'd seen and what had happened in front of our entire group either. Instead, I walked over to the timer and reset it to the highest setting once more, giving them more time. Then, I let Devin lead me away, and as soon as we were out of earshot of the others, I explained to Devin in hushed tones what I'd seen and what I'd experienced out in the pond. As I spoke, his eyes widened in horror and concern, and probably from my mental health. I could tell he was speechless. When I finished, he pulled me into a comforting hug, rubbing my hair. He suggested we go take a hot shower before returning to our camp for the night, and I readily agreed. Devin took me into the ladies' room, turned on the hot water in the last of the 6 shower stalls, and helped me step in. Once in, I peeled my swimsuit off, dropping it onto the shower floor. I didn't realize how cold I actually was until I stepped under the hot stream of water. I looked at Devin expectantly, waiting for him to join me. Instead, he told me he was going to run to the car to grab our toiletry bag and a change of clothes. I wasn't particularly thrilled at that notion, but I just nodded and pleaded with him to hurry. I stood directly in the hot water, steam surrounding me, until I was no longer shivering from the cold. I heard an abrupt shuffle at the entrance to the restroom. "Devin? Is that you?" I said. No answer. Oh, fuck. My pulse quickened, and those glowing black eyes darted through my racing mind. I risked a quick peek from behind my shower curtain, and my eyes hurriedly scanned my vicinity. Nothing or no one in sight. I slammed the curtain shut and noticed how erratic my breathing was. I focused solely, or attempted to at least, on the steady stream over my body, and I tried to calm my breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. After a few minutes of this mostly unsuccessful technique, I heard Devin rush into the bathroom. I could tell he'd been running. "Maddie, you still in there?" he half shouted. I opened the shower curtain once more and looked him over. He was white as a sheet, dots of sweat beading across his forehead. His eyes were panicked and confused. "Of course I'm still here. Where the hell else would I be?" I hadn't meant to sound so rude, but he was frightening me. He handed me the soap and shampoo, told me to hurry up and that he would keep watch. Watch for what? While I swiftly soaped up and rinsed off, I listened on as he breathlessly told me that when he was at the car just now, he was leaning in looking for our toiletry bag when he'd sensed someone directly behind him. "Devin, is that you?" He'd heard me ask in an uneasy voice. Alarm bells went off in my head at that, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Like trying to think of a word on the tip of your tongue, the warning was just out of reach. Devin said he'd found my tone unsettling, so he had immediately turned around to face me. "What? Of course it's me," he replied as he turned. But no one was there. I was genuinely shocked, and admittedly a tiny bit relieved to know I wasn't losing my mind, although a white padded room might be preferable to whatever this was. I was suddenly cold again, and the shivering had returned. I got out of the shower and dressed as quickly as possible in the clothes Devin brought for me. Black leggings, an old t-shirt, my favorite black oversized hoodie, and my slip-on checkerboard Vans. I threw everything else in my towel, and gathered up the corners into a makeshift bag. Devin turned on the flashlight, grabbed my hand firmly, and we cautiously headed back to our campsite, looking all around us suspiciously. I glanced back towards the pond and could see that the timer had shut off, covering the sand and water in darkness. Devin looked back too, and our eyes met, fearful for our friends. As we approached the site, I could see Elias rebuilding the fire and Kiana sitting in the opening of their tent, wrapped up in a large towel. I sighed relief, and I could feel Devin relax beside me. The four of us quietly sat around the fire for probably another half hour. Kiana eventually broke the silence, announcing it was bedtime, and gave Elias a meaningful and flirtatious stare. He eagerly jumped up, grinning sheepishly, and followed her into the tent. "Good night, guys," Kiana said with a wink. Once their dark blue tent was zipped up, Devin and I looked at each other and laughed, despite the night's events. I checked my watch for the first time since heading to the pond, and I was surprised to see it was only 2:11 a.m. It felt much, much later. I really didn't want to stay the night anymore, but I figured we would be safe enough right by the car. Our tents were only about 8 feet from one another, plus, if all else failed, I had brought my .22 Sig Sauer with me. We decided about 10 minutes later to head to bed ourselves, and Devin stoked the fire one last time while I retrieved my gun from the car, just in case. I fell asleep quickly and slept hard through the night, and when I woke up the next morning, I could hear Kiana and Elias talking. Their voices sounded strange, upset, and it triggered all of the events from last night to come flooding back. Shit, had all of that seriously happened? I sighed and stretched out my legs, simultaneously arching my back. I rolled over towards Devin and kissed him on the cheek. He stirred and sleepily opened his eyes and smiled at me lazily, and I laid my head on his chest. He stayed like that for a few minutes, trying to wake up, and at last we got up and climbed out of our tent into the bright morning light. We greeted Kiana and Elias, and I noticed Kiana shot Devin a weird look. What was that about? Before I could ask about coffee, always my first thought in the morning, Elias said he had some bad news for us and pointed towards my car. The large tree branch, the same pointed one from behind the restrooms, was on the roof of my car. Much to my dismay, I noticed a long, deep scratch on the passenger side of my car. What the fuck? Elias said they just found my car like that when they woke up, only 15 minutes before we did. Kiana said she'd gotten up around 4:30 to grab an extra blanket from the car, and the branch wasn't there. She then gave Devin the same weird look from before, and asked him what the fuck he was doing when she saw him, also awake and outside of our tent. He looked shocked, utterly confused, and asked her to elaborate. Kiana explained that when she was searching through my car for a blanket, she'd heard a twig snap from the rear of our campsite. She had twisted around, looked past our tents, and there, behind a small tree, stood Devin. She said he'd appeared to be hunched over, and so much so at first she thought he must be getting sick, maybe from the beer. "Yo, Dev, is that you?" she'd asked. "What? Of course it's me," he replied as he straightened up. Kiana said it was dark from the dying fire, but she could tell he was smiling at her. It wasn't his usual smile, she explained. It was eerie, not a real smile. More like he was just showing his teeth. The same smile from the pond the night before flashed through my mind. She told him good night, and instead of responding, he just kept smiling at her. After the initial shock of hearing her recollection, Devin swore that once we went to bed last night, he didn't get up or even wake up at all until I woke him up this morning. Kiana and Elias looked over at us skeptically, so we spilled everything we had experienced the previous night. They listened intently, and when we were finished, Kiana looked dazed, and Elias cursed. I told them all that I thought we should leave. Before I was even done speaking, Elias was shaking his head no. "We've already paid, and no refunds. Plus, I'm not going back to civilization until I absolutely have to," he protested. Kiana nodded in agreement, and even Devin looked disappointed at the thought of cutting our weekend short. "I think everything can be explained, you know? "Devin, do you have a history of sleepwalking?" asked Kiana. To his knowledge, he didn't. Maybe the other campers were fucking with us. Maybe that was who I saw in the pond. But still, whoever it was kissed me. They were bold, too bold. I shuddered at the memory, still creeped out. Eventually, Elias and Kiana wore us down, and we agreed to stay for the second and final night. I wasn't happy about it, but I did have my gun, and I'd grown up target practicing with my dad and brother every weekend. I was an even better shot than Devin, so I felt comforted by the added protection. We spent the morning drinking coffee, making breakfast burritos, and talking around the fire we made to cook breakfast. We were waiting for the day to warm up a bit so we could go down to the pond and swim and lounge in the sun. Around noon, it was finally warm enough, so we made some sandwiches, packed them in the cooler with some beers, and headed back down to the pond, again stopping off at the bathrooms to change into our swimsuits. When we passed by the other people's campsite once again, no one was in view, though all of their belongings were. I found it odd, but assumed they were down at the pond or maybe out hiking. I hoped, whoever they were, that they were okay. We changed in the bathroom without incident and headed down to the pond. We sat on the sand and ate our sandwiches and drank a few beers, all chatting happily. Devin and Elias were talking about the metal band they were in and their upcoming shows. Devin was the lead guitarist and Elias was the drummer, and Kiana and I chatted away about the books we'd been reading. Books were the entire reason we'd originally become friends. We were definite fangirls, and our conversations were famous for rapidly turning nerdy. The sun was hot overhead, so I lathered my unnaturally pale skin in the sunscreen, and Devin and I decided to go swimming when we started sweating in the heat, and the water felt amazing. We raced out to the floating wooden dock in the center of the pond, pulling ourselves up when we reached it. We collapsed side by side in the center of the dock, and I rolled over onto my side to face him, telling him I loved him. We laid basking in the glow of the sun and the love we felt for each other, and the unpleasantness of last night faded away even more. We were in a perfect moment, and neither of us wanted to move. I didn't want it to end. My favorite quote from the book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, popped into my head. And in that moment, I swear we were infinite, I recited to Devin. He kissed me again softly. We must have drifted off to sleep, and we were jolted awake by the sudden and harsh movement of the dock beneath us. Devin bolted up, and I followed. Suddenly, Elias shot out of the water, spraying us as he pulled himself onto the dock, cracked up at our alarmed faces. Kiana pulled herself up behind him, and I laughed at myself for getting scared. We played that old children's game for a while, King of the Hill, pushing each other off the dock and climbing back up, trying desperately to be the last one standing. Devin won, only to go crashing into the water while I grabbed his ankles from where I was bobbing in the water beside the dock. When he emerged, he was laughing and tickled me. We kissed, and again it was gentle. Nothing like the rough kiss I'd gotten last night. The four of us lazily swam back to the shore, and after I dried off, I checked my watch. 5:30. Damn, the day flew by. We decided to all go and take showers before making dinner and hanging out for the evening. We went to the campsite first to retrieve dry towels, toiletries, and clothes. Again, when we passed the only other occupied campsite, no one was around. Except this time, all of their things were packed up and missing, and the old truck that had been parked there was gone. We now had the entire grounds to ourselves, and that both comforted and freaked me out. We headed back to the showers and went our respective ways. Kiana took the third shower stall, and I took the fourth one beside her. The water felt hotter on my shoulders than it did on my hands, and I realized I had a slight sunburn. Hey, at least it was some color. I showered, taking my time. Kiana started humming a song by Pierce the Veil, her favorite band. I listened on while I quickly gave my legs a once-over with my razor. When I was done, I turned off my water and reached out from behind my shower curtain for my towel. Kiana's water was still on beside me. I was feeling around, trying to grab my towel, when suddenly I felt something hot and wet lick my hand, much like my dog does at home. The biggest difference was the consistency of the tongue, grainy like sandpaper. I snapped my arm back into my shower stall, frothy slobber running down my hand. a scream escaped from somewhere within me. Kiana immediately jumped out of her stall, and when she flung my curtain aside, she was wrapped haphazardly in a towel, gaping at me quizzically. Devin came running in a minute later, Elias on his heels. Fuck, I was naked. Kiana went and stopped Elias from coming back, letting Devin pass by her. "Something licked me!" I said loudly, my voice hoarse and shrill. I was wiping my hand furiously, my skin turning red. Devin looked at me like I was losing it until he met my eyes. He knew me, and he knew the fear he saw was genuine. He grabbed my hand, stopped my manic scrubbing, and helped me up. I hadn't even realized I was squatting down, cowered in the corner of the stall. He grabbed my towel off the long bench in front of the stalls and wrapped me in it and rubbed the tops of my arms in comfort. "I can't stay here. I can't stay here," I whispered over and over into his shoulder, letting him hold me. Kiana, looking concerned, grabbed the rest of her stuff and said she was going over to the men's room to change, giving us a few minutes to ourselves. Devin sat on the bench while I dried off and got dressed. Another pair of black leggings, another old t-shirt, and another hoodie. I sat on the bench beside him to put on my favorite Vans and tied them in a double knot as I always did. Definitely my usual uniform for the fall. I checked my watch. 6:35. "We can leave if you want. Come back and get Kiana and Elias in the morning," Devin offered as I meticulously washed my hands in the sink. I couldn't imagine under what circumstances I would abandon my best friend, but getting licked on the hand wasn't it. He already knew that, though. "I know, it's only one more night anyways. We'll be okay," he promised once he saw the look on my face. The thought of leaving them here without a car or a gun, I couldn't do that. He couldn't either. I kissed him lightly on the lips and headed for the door. It was time to head back to our campsite and make dinner. I rubbed my hand absent-mindedly as we walked, and the sunset was beautiful that night, and fairly early. We watched the sun as it set behind the pond in the distance. The aroma of our meal had just started filling the air. We were making a delicious meal Kiana had found the recipe for online. We ate our dinner around the fire, and for a while it was quiet, just the soft sound of classic rock playing from the car. We were all hungry from the day in the sun and water, and the food tasted amazing. When we were finished eating, we cleaned up and went to the bathrooms to wash up, our hands sticky from the barbecue sauce. Since we were the only people camping, we all went into the ladies' room. As we were washing our hands and talking about what to do that night, we heard the same shuffling noise from the night before coming from the back of the building. This time, Elias and Kiana walked over to the window, looking out of the screen. Devin and I watched on intently. "It's just the old lady from the gate," Kiana explained as they stepped away from the window. "She walks weird," Elias added. "I saw her there last night, too," I reminded them. "She's probably just making the rounds," Devin said. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief and headed back to camp. We sat around the fire drinking beer, and it was reminiscent of the previous night, drinking, listening to music, and talking happily. The night was clear and beautiful, and the stars twinkled brightly over our heads. After drinking for a while, we again grew restless, just like the night before. Instead of returning to the pond, we decided to go for a night hike on one of the many winding trails around the edge of the property. The guys each grabbed a flashlight, and Kiana and I both put on headlamps. I saw Elias sticking a hunting knife in the side of his boot. Devin handed me my gun, and I snapped my gun's holster belt around my waist, pulling my hoodie over it, not having any belt loops in my leggings to pull it through. I crammed 2 10+1 magazines in my hoodie pocket, just in case. We entered the woods a few minutes later, and I immediately felt uneasy, like we were being watched. I shook it off, and Elias took the lead, followed by Kiana, then me, and finally Devin bringing up the rear. We had hiked out probably half a mile, maybe more, when we reached a large fallen tree lying across the path. One by one we climbed over it, Elias helping Kiana and I jump down, and then Devin landed nimbly on his feet beside me. I smiled up at him, and then all hell broke loose. Suddenly, the old lady from the gate stepped out from behind a large tree to the right of the path. Her movements were all wrong and jerky. She growled. She actually growled, She had the same frothy spittle I had on my hand in the bathroom, and it was running down her chin. She was closest to frozen Kiana, and she ambled up to her. We were all rooted to the spots we were standing, watching in complete horror as the old lady leaned into Kiana's neck and sniffed her. The old woman let out a terrifying screech, which snapped Elias, Devin, and myself into action. Elias immediately put himself between Kiana and the old woman as I ran up behind her and pulled her backwards towards the fallen tree. She recoiled when I touched her, but I kept my firm grasp around her waist. Devin ran in front of us to assist Elias. The old woman's glare skimmed over and then beyond the guys, and she wouldn't move her gaze off of us, her glowing black eyes from me to Kiana and back to me. She licked her lips, her dark tongue dribbling even more foamy saliva down her face. Time stood still as she quickly, and much too agile for a woman her age, lurched at Elias, throwing him to the ground just beyond the line of trees. I heard him moan at the impact. Devin moved towards her, and in an instant she had him on the ground, snarling and snapping her teeth wildly, mere inches from his face, her spit spraying everywhere. She had the uncanny movements and behaviors of a rabid animal. "Gun!" Devin choked out as her hands closed around his throat. Before it clicked in my head that I was armed, Elias came towering out of the trees, hunting knife in his hand, and he swiped at her, slicing her shoulder. She threw her head back and released another piercing scream before grabbing Devin by his hair and slamming his head into the ground, dazing him. She turned on Elias, and they circled each other like two predators in the wild. He yelled and ran at her, and she literally leapt over him with a feline grace, landing behind him. She hit him in the back hard. He hit the ground again, but this time he remained still. She turned her head and scowled at Kiana and I, twisting her body unnaturally to face us. "Do your ears hang low? Do they wobble to and fro? Can you tie them in a knot? Can you tie them in a bow?" She crooned the old summer camp tune at us. Her voice was warbled, and I heard both mine and Kiana's voices inside of hers. I reeled at that, and Kiana sobbed beside me. She started towards us, still moving abnormally. When she passed Devin on the ground, he grabbed her ankle. She looked down, distracted for a moment, and I took the opportunity to grab my gun out of its place in its holster and load one of the magazines. My fingers trembling, I turned the safety off and pulled back the slide, chambering around. The clicking sound of me loading the gun made the old woman look back at me. I had the gun pointed directly at her face. "Fucking stop," I begged. She inspected the gun in my shaking hands. "Please, just stop. I will shoot you if I have to," I said. She ignored this, shook Devin's grip off of her foot, and charged at me, wailing. Kiana covered her face with her hands beside me, and I pointed my gun down, aiming at the awful creature's knee. I pulled the trigger, firing once. I didn't miss. She hit the ground, blood squirting out of the wound in her knee. She roared in pain, grabbing at the dirt, at her knee, and at her hair, not knowing what to do. I turned to Kiana, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Go get Elias, we've got to get out of here." She obeyed. I ran to Devin's side, and he was trying to sit up when I reached him. I helped him to stand. "I shot her, Devin, I fucking shot her. I didn't have a choice, she didn't give me a choice." I was crying into his chest. "It's okay, but we need to go. We need to get the hell out of here. We need to get help." We went over to help Kiana, and Elias was sitting up against a tree, wincing and holding his leg. "I think he's broken his ankle," Kiana said, still crying. "Elias, we're going to help you walk, but you've got to stand up, okay?" Elias nodded his head, and we helped him to stand. Kiana got on one side of him, and Devin on the other, his arms around their shoulders, and we made our way back over the fallen tree. She was gone. The old woman was gone. All that was left was a pool of blood where she'd been, and a trail of blood that disappeared into the thick forest beyond the path. "Maddie, take point and lead us back, and keep your gun out and ready," said Devin. We made our way around the fallen tree on the opposite side of the path from the blood trail. There was no way to get Elias over it. Once I'd gotten us back to the path, we made our way back to camp as swiftly as possible, Elias groaning in pain. We made it back without seeing the old bitch, and Kiana and Devin immediately sat Elias in the front seat of my car. We grabbed everything and threw it into the rear of my hatchback, not bothering to properly pack anything up, and within minutes I was driving us down the dirt road towards the front gate. We were getting the fuck out of there, and as we approached the gate, I noticed it was shut and locked. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I slammed on the brakes, sliding to a stop just inches from the iron fence. The porch light turned on in front of the small trailer off to the side of the gate where the little old lady lived. The door opened, and we all watched in absolute shock and terror as the little old woman came ambling down the steps and up to my car. She was moving normally, though, and maybe just a little stiff, like old people sometimes do. Definitely not like someone who'd just been shot in the kneecap. My stomach heaved, and my vision was momentarily blurred all around the edges. When she got to my car, she rapped her knuckles on my window, and I cracked it half an inch cautiously. "Y'all all right?" she asked in a southern drawl. I noticed her eyes were a pretty caramel brown color, and not at all like the glowing solid black eyes we'd seen in the woods. Do you have a sister?" I babbled. "Oh no, hun. I'm afraid it's just me out here. Gets lonely sometimes. Y'all leaving? It's middle of the night." Yeah, my friend twisted his ankle, and we think it might be broken and we need to get him help," I responded, crossing my fingers that she would just let us leave. "Oh no. I'm sorry to hear that, baby. Y'all go on and get him to the hospital, you hear?" She sympathetically looked down at me with genuine concern and moved to unlock the gate. Once she removed the chain and lock and pulled the gate open, I drove through, not bothering to say another word. I looked in my rear view as I pulled down the dirt road to the exit, and I saw her waving at us in the red glow of my brake lights. I turned onto the main road and drove about 5 miles before I lost it. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, crying and hitting the steering wheel, my hands balled into fists. Before I knew it, the driver door was open and Devin had me in his arms, petting my hair and telling me I was safe. He let me go to open the back door to the back seat and slid in beside me beside Kiana. She put her arms around me, and I let her hold me as Devin drove us the fuck away from there. Elias refused to go to the hospital, so Devin drove us to our house, and I made up the guest bedroom for them mindlessly, feeling like a zombie. We all went to bed exhausted. I slept restlessly, tossing and turning, dreaming of black eyes and snarling teeth. In the morning, the 4 of us gathered in the den. We turned on the news. In a town as small as ours, if someone reported a gunshot wound, it would be plastered all over our local channels. We saw nothing of the sort. We agreed that, unless someone injured was reported, we would keep our mouths shut. My friends, they wanted to protect me, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Maddie, you saved our lives. Don't feel guilty about that. If you hadn't, I don't know what would have happened to us or what that thing would have done." Kiana shuddered as she tried to comfort me. "Yeah, man, what you did any of us would have done if that gun had been in our hands," Elias agreed, while Devin held me tightly. Over the next month, we all checked the newspapers, online, and the TV religiously to see if someone would come forward. A small part of me wanted her to, so I would know who or what she was and maybe know why she did it. A bigger part of me wanted her to stay hidden. No one ever came forward, and nothing was ever reported. For about a year, Kiana and Elias helped Devin and I with all the research we were doing, trying to figure out what the fuck that thing was. Eventually, they all wanted to move on, and I can't say I blame them. We're all still close, but we have a shadow over our group that wasn't there before. Devin and I have continued with our search for the past 2 years, mostly hitting dead ends. Occasionally, we will come across a similar story, similar circumstances, but not much comes from those either. It isn't easy to find evidence of the supernatural, and I know that's what this was, supernatural. But if you look hard enough and long enough, you'll find snippets here and there. I've recently come to the conclusion, and Devin agrees, that we will probably never know what attacked us that night. And I'll never forget it, though. I see those black, soulless eyes absent of any white, and that haunting smile when I close my eyes at night. Whenever I go swimming, I can hear something whispering my name from behind me, and sometimes I wake up swearing I just heard a gunshot. Whatever that thing is, it is infinite. Uncle Josh note. Someone responded to this author questioning the veracity of this story, and the author insists that it is true. Her response: "I've kept a very detailed journal of my life since I was 10 years old, and I camped out there every spring as a child until it got a little more run down and we stopped going. Thanks for your opinion, though." Like The Strangers, only with teddy bears, by H298038. This happened to me around December. I live in a city that has a 2.5-hour 911 response time, and I live by myself in a fairly safe part of town. One night, I went to my best friend's house to watch a movie and have dinner, and he was trying to distract me because my ex-boyfriend had recently broken up with me, and I was heartbroken. I got back to my house around 10 p.m. and then decided to go to Walmart to buy cat food. When I got back from Walmart, someone had left a plethora of creepy stuffed animals outside my door. Their beady little eyes seemed to stare up at me, and I felt my heart sinking into my stomach as I looked into the bear's eyes. One of the bears was actually a little stuffed horse, and it looked familiar to me, but I couldn't place where or how I had seen it before. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt like the bears were watching me, and someone else was also watching me. Almost like there was a pair of arms behind me, reaching for me. Just this really weird, awful feeling. I called my best friend and sent him pictures of the bears. He was also really creeped out and asked me if I wanted him to come and get me. I told him I thought it was fine, and I took a shower and got ready for bed. After I had gone to bed around 11:30, someone rang my doorbell once. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most of my friends know not to ring the doorbell to my house, because I can only hear it in my office and in my bedroom. I went to go look, and saw 3 men standing there. Terrified, I called 911, and they said they would get someone over there as soon as possible. And meanwhile, about every 2 minutes or so, the people kept ringing the doorbell. I wanted to stay quiet. I felt scared enough that I put my cat into a carrier and pulled us up into the attic of the house. The entrance to the attic is really hidden, and the fact that the house has an attic is not very apparent. I decided not to call my friend because I didn't want to put him in danger, and I wanted to stay as quiet as possible. I stayed in the attic for nearly an hour after the ringing stopped and went back downstairs. No word from the cops. I figured that there are a lot of homeless people around in the area, and sometimes they come and ask for blankets. I decided to go back to bed, but then I was woken up by a banging on the door. I quickly called the police again to see if it was them. It wasn't. I told them that this had been going on for hours, and they still hadn't come, and that I was afraid the people at the door were going to try to hurt me. They told me they were having a very busy night, but they were trying to get there as soon as possible. The next thing I knew, I heard the banging on the back door, and I started shaking and decided the cops were probably not going to come and help me. So I called my friend. He told me to grab my car keys and try to set the alarm on the car, and to pack up the cat, keep the lights off, and that he and his 2 roommates would be there as soon as possible. I set off my car alarm, which was close to the backyard. The men weren't deterred and remained banging. I kept the alarm going, though, and I grabbed my cat and hid in the closet this time because I was too shaky to get back into the attic. The banging continued on the back door as well as the front door, and then a third banging started on my bedroom window. My friend and his roommates showed up within 5 minutes of me calling, and I heard my friend yell at them to get the fuck out of here, and that he was armed. The 3 men immediately retreated. My friend called me and told me he was at the door and everything was okay. He stayed inside and comforted me while his friends searched around to make sure the men were actually gone. His roommates came back inside, and one of them looked like he had seen a ghost. He didn't want to tell me what he'd found, but he felt like it wasn't safe for us to stay there, so we packed up the cat again and left. When we got to their house, his friend told me he had found a bunch of pictures of me taken on an instant camera in an envelope on the ground in the backyard. The pictures were of me from the evening, pictures of me getting home, me leaving my house, and me inside Walmart. I couldn't believe I had missed being followed, and that no one else had noticed people taking pictures of me in Walmart. I called the cops again to tell them not to bother coming, that I wasn't there, and I wasn't even concerned about a burglary at that point. I lived with my friend for about 2 months before moving back into my house. Until last night, nothing had happened. but late last night I was at a bar with friends, and I ran into my ex-boyfriend's best friend. He was belligerently drunk and came up to talk to me. In his drunken stupor, he revealed to me that he, my ex, and my ex's sister were the three people behind the events of that night, and that my ex was hoping I would get scared, call him, and then we would get back together. The whole thing ended up making so much more sense, as my ex had owned a camera store and had a ton of instant cameras, and I had seen the horse before in his mother's house. She used to keep it on the couch. So, crazy ex-boyfriend? Let's not meet. The Old Man, submitted by Burning Flames. My ex-husband and I were on our way to the grocery store, about 30 kilometers from where we lived at that time in northern Norway. When we were about halfway there, I saw a man in an old orange anorak crossing the road. He looked like he belonged back in maybe just after World War II time, and I asked my ex if he saw him. Of course he didn't. But about 2 weeks later, this happened again at the same place, and I told him again that I saw this old guy, but he didn't see it then either. This was a thing that got stuck in my mind, and I knew I was thinking it probably meant something since it happened twice. So I knew someone who lived in that area and told them about it. I explained to them how this guy looked, and they told me that they'd heard that right down the road there was a fisherman's place in the old days, and that they had heard a story about a man that died on the sea that was now ghosting around. Others had seen him too. I was in shock. Maybe he just wanted me to get a good story, or maybe he was a relative I'd never met since he showed himself to me twice. Who knows? Why I Don't Answer Unknown Calls, submitted by Dead Father. This happened to me when I was 17. I was hanging out with friends on a Friday night in a typical small town. We were driving around trying to figure out what we were going to do, and long story short, we ended up hanging out at a park. During the car ride, I kept on receiving unknown and private phone calls, and every time I would pick up, there was static or nothing. My friends were a year older than me and loved giving everyone a hard time. I took the phone calls as a prank, and it was probably one of my other friends we were going to pick up as the culprit. The night went on fine until I kept receiving these unknown calls. I told my friends about the occurrences, and they just told me to answer the next one. The first 2 calls were busts, and then on the third, I picked up. I heard a woman crying. My heart dropped and I said, "Hello? Are you okay?" She didn't say anything else and the call dropped. I told my friends about it, and they thought I was just fucking around. The calls continued, and I got pissed. Finally, the last call came in, and it was the same woman. All I could hear was her crying, and what she said next scared the fuck out of me. She said, In danger. He's gonna kill me. Help me!" The line went dead, and I sat there in the car, quiet. To this day, my friends still think I was joking. I'm not sure if it was a prank or whatever, but that's some serious shit and shouldn't be joked about. I don't know if that woman is still alive, but I hope she's okay. And to this day, when I see an unknown or private number, I immediately think back about what happened when I was 17. Nowadays, though, when I see an unknown or private number, I just forward it to voicemail. That was, without a doubt, the creepiest experience I have ever had. Thanks for listening, gang. I hope you enjoyed this volume of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Please like and subscribe to this channel, and check out all of my other stories here too. And be sure to hit that notification button to make sure that you hear all of my updates as I upload. If you really like what you've heard, please share it with your friends, and follow me on social media. All of the links to that are in the description below. And if you would like to go the extra mile, throw me a tip on my Patreon page and keep this channel ad-free. I am always looking for your scary stories, and I read them all. Send anything you've got to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Thanks again, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. Could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.